So today we're here to talk about the 12 most frequently asked questions about parenting on the internet. In Canada, we have the Divorce Act, and under Section 16 of the Divorce Act, it is best interests of the child. That is what governs. There are good fathers and good mothers, and there's bad fathers and bad mothers. And particularly, when you're working in a community where a lot of fathers work jobs that are out of town or energy related, that is on shift schedules, that can create a balance when it comes to parenting time because they're not available to parent their children. That doesn't mean that they can't be there. But no, there's absolutely not. There is no bias against fathers or mothers in parenting matters. Yes, you can. Sort of. And the sort of is kind of tied to, they're two separate issues. Parenting and child support, they're separate from each other. But can someone say, hi, like you're not making your commitments on this part, so will you make your commitments on this part? So going to kind of credibility, that can always have an impact. But no, someone should not deny access just because you're not paying child support. Someone should not pay child support just because they're denying access. Those two, you should look at them as two separate issues. Courts will typically look at them as two separate issues. What you want to do is you're trying to say, hey, look, I want this child to relocate to live with me in my jurisdiction. If that's a different province, different territory, different state, the challenge is that person is leaving, that child, right, has everything set up for them currently. They have their friends, they have their schools, if there's other relatives, especially if the other parents' relatives live in that jurisdiction. And so when you talk about best interest of child, those are all things that a court would normally consider. And so barring some form of abusive situation that's harmful to the child, parents with drug addictions, parents with alcoholism, or a parent that abandons them, it's going to be a challenge to relocate with them. And there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. Super complicated question. So one of the challenging things in any parts of life is, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that something did not happen? And it is such a challenge. And, for those of you who have to deal with that, where people make false accusations, especially regarding child sexual assault and things like that, that people use in order to manipulate our justice system to their advantage, my heart goes out to you. It's such a challenge to deal with that, and its impacts are far-reaching, on both, an emotional, spiritual level as well. So the best way of dealing with false accusations is simply with evidence. So if someone says, hi, they call me names all the time, and you have messages that say, look, here's my regular correspondence with them, I do not do this. So even though you can't prove that exact accusation, you might be able to provide other evidence that shows that that you're acting in a reasonable way. The one thing that you don't want to do, by the way, when people make false accusations, is just go and give your false accusations back at them and start accusing them of doing random stuff that they never did, or that they never did. At the end of the day, both of those, any sort of false accusation, it just makes the child's life worse. And at the end of the day, what I think both parents want is what's in the best interest of the child. So it's a very challenging question. Yeah, you just have to be honest, be forthright, give documentary evidence as possible to allude to it, but that's really all you can do. Absolutely. You absolutely can lose custody for drug use. And when we talk about custody, what we mean is your parenting time. The question is does any action of a parent put the children at risk? It's known for years that secondhand smoke has a harmful effect on children's development and on people generally, right? You can get cancer from secondhand smoke. So in certain jurisdictions, both tobacco and marijuana are legal. But those same jurisdictions might have restrictions on smoking around children, or smoking in vehicles, or smoking in, public places or private places. So bearing that in mind as well, even though certain acts can be legal, even within that range, certain acts can also be illegal. And so that kind of helps. Well, if someone's going to be, violating a law, that goes to their ability to parent as well. But the really thing at the end of the day is going to be best interest of the children. Odds are, if you're having drug use, but you're still being able to act as a parent, that you're not going to lose everything, right? But you can do things like have supervised parenting time with someone else. And there's other solutions out there. The biggest question when you're looking at those sort of situations, whether you're the parent who's being accused of using drug use, or you're the parent who's saying, look, their drug use is causing harm to the child, is, well, what steps are they going to take to ensure that the children is safe, or the child is safe? No. Look, at the end of the day, particularly when we're talking about blended families, people will move on. And if you separate with young children, you're not going to be like, okay, both of you, are not allowed to see anybody else for the next 13 years until the child turns 18. That's both unrealistic and has no grounds in the reality of humans as social beings. The only time that tends to come up is, and again, you're going to hear this quite a bit throughout this series of questions, what is in the best interest of the child? So if the new partner is going to cause harm to that child, like the new partner is a drug dealer, the new partner, I'm using some pretty extreme examples, the new partner attempted suicide in front of the children. Those are reasons why that new partner might be restricted from seeing the children. But no, the person's going to move on. You want them to move on. You want them to be happy. Just because it didn't work for you doesn't mean that you want them to be miserable, because if they are miserable, your children will not have the best life possible. Police will enforce child custody if there's an order obligating them to do so, and in doing so they feel that they're not going to harm the child. So sometimes you'll get an order and it has a police enforcement clause in it that says that if this order isn't followed, the police can step in and enforce the order. But this is the question: is having the police show up at your ex's residence and take your child out of there and into your vehicle and then drive them to your place going to be traumatic for the child? Absolutely it will be, right? And will that create more harm than good? Probably. And so in deciding to do that, I typically suggest that it's for a very specific reason, like that parent has refused several times to provide the children back. Get a police enforcement clause. That parent has taken the children away from, your town or municipality without telling you or communicating with you, even if they brought them back at the same time. Might be a reason for a police enforcement clause. But for the most part, police don't like enforcing. They don't like hurting people. As much as some of you might think, or the news might let on, I'd say the average police person actually wants to help people. And so and more so, they don't want to create more paperwork for themselves. So, they're less likely to enforce things unless there's a clear path. The other thing to keep in mind too is the older the child is. So when a child starts hitting 15, 16, 17, police aren't going to try and enforce against that as much as well, because that child they take police over there and the child just walks out the door and walks away. I always like using this kind of representation. Lawyers are skilled labor. They've gone to school and they have practical experience. And you know what? That's the same thing for a welder or a plumber or an accountant or a dentist. Barbers, right? Go to school, get practical experience. And I use an analogy of a mechanic where I can rotate my tires and I can change my oil. I can't change my transmission. And I know people who put diesel in their gas-powered vehicles. So people's capacity to understand and act for themselves from a legal sense is one factor. The second factor to this is, particularly dealing with family law situations, is do they have the emotional capacity to deal with hotly contested matters, particularly with an ex that they disagree with or have had traumatic experiences with, to rep themselves the best as possible. And so that's kind of another reason why someone gets a lawyer, is to be that objective third party. You will not be successful in this particular instance because of A, B, C, and D, notwithstanding that it might not be unfair. Notwithstanding that might not be fair to you. And that's what that objective third party is there for. No. And I say that no, kind of like in this wavy form, as in, look, if your child is in the other person's care, as long as they're safe, you don't need to know like what they're doing. So dad's taking them to Kelsey's. I don't even know if Kelsey's exists anymore. Anyway, Kelsey's, for dinner. No, he doesn't need to tell you that they're going out for dinner, right? That's the day-to-day parents. You have to be able to trust that, in the day-to-day events, parents are going to take after their children. You certainly have a right to know if they are leaving the country, and there's certain restrictions on that as kind of as due course. If they're leaving the state / province / territory they're residing in, is kind of a gray area, and a lot of times, sometimes that can be included or not, depending on past behavior. The biggest thing is going to be, do you need to have that oversight, or are the children safe? And again, go back to what is in the best interest of the child. If someone had past behaviors where they took the child without telling you where they were going, and they went to risky places, like all of a sudden they're showing up at 2 a.m. at a club and they're 7, then yes, there could be reasons why that would be put into an order. But for the most part, for most people, no. Children's input into custody battles is such a challenging thought process, and here's the reasons why. On one hand, you don't want your children involved at all, because you're putting them in between a disagreement between their mom and their dad. And that means that you're trying to force them to make a decision between their mom and their dad. And that's not a safe place for a child to be. And that creates trauma in its own right. That also empowers a child to make a decision that they might not have the ability to make on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. Which parent do I like more? Which parent do I want to stay with longer? They might not be able to intellectually differentiate between what their parents are telling them. Mom doesn't love you, dad doesn't care about you, etc., etc., and what they actually want in an objective way. So because of that, there's obviously going to be a age barrier where a child might not have the input, on a general basis, to be able to say, this is what I want. The older the child is, the more likely that input is going to be accepted by a court. And the older a child is, the more they're going to be able to communicate why they want something. And that why is just as important, right? I go over to mom's place and she never has dinner. I have to get myself up to go to school. I make my own lunch every day. And then when I get home from school, she's not there. Or she's, dad's dating 4 other people in the last 3 months. I never get to spend any quality time with him like I did before. We used to play basketball together and we don't do that anymore. So they're able to actually explain the reasons why they don't want to be with a person. Or again, mom's there after school every day. She helps me with my homework. We go out to friends' places. I love having fun with her. Dad reads me a bedtime story every night. I loved it when dad reads me that bedtime story. We have our routine. We eat dinner. We do our homework together. So the child has to be able to communicate those things about why they want something. And although age can be kind of this variance based off the child's very fact-specific needs to them, the answer is maybe yes, maybe no. Nesting is where the parents have one home for the children. And so one parent flies away during the other person's parenting time, and then they come back during their parenting time. So instead of the children transitioning between houses, the parents transition between houses. But what that almost necessitates, though, is having 3 properties, depending on what that parenting time allocation is. I have seen nesting work when the parents still have a fairly amicable relationship with each other, where they have close family members in the same municipality, and where one parent works away for a large portion of the month. So I've seen it work with a pilot, for example, and so they were gone 27 of 30 days in a month. But for the 3 days they're back, that's still their place. They go there, they have that. But it comes with some sort of trust issues. Like, so during that period of time, what do they do with other relationships, and can they bring other people there? They both have property at that home, and the further they move on from that relationship, the more likely that that's going to be something that they want to be private. And so within that nest, can they have their own privacy? And that tends to be the largest challenge that I see with nesting working out in the long term. In the short term, and oftentimes I'll see a nesting relationship happen like immediately after separation, because mom will go stay with their parents, dad will go stay with their parents, and they'll go back and forth for that as they sort out, okay, what are we going to do with the house, and what are going to be the long-term living situations. But that creates less of a change for the children right off the bat, and so that can be a very positive thing. No. So we joke about this. Florida changed theirs last year, I think, from a presumption of 50-50 to best interest for the child. New Zealand, Australia had changed it back and forth in the past as well. And so different jurisdictions often struggle with that particular dynamic. Should both parents be presumed to have 50-50, or should we just focus on best interest of the child? Most places will focus on best interest of the child. Obviously, when you start looking at different cultural implications, there'll be different preferences associated out. No, they're completely different based off of jurisdictions. Can be, when you talk about Canada and the United States on a state, provincial level, that can be wildly different, between one state over. And the same type of forum shopping that happens in the state over like labor laws and labor disputes, being in certain jurisdictions, or corporate, actions being in Delaware, can also happen for family law as well, particularly, depending on how mobile the parties are. So the answer is no. They can be quite different in different jurisdictions. I think one of the common themes, though, and I've said it several times, and if you watch some of my videos several times, is what is in the best interest of the child? What is going to make the children the safest, the most stable, the happiest? And for the most part, that's going to be an overarching feature to everything, though. If you like our video, please like and subscribe so that you can get additional content like this.